Does this mean we're live?
I think we are, yeah.
Cool. Oh, this is great. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Emma McInnes, and I'll be your host of this wonderful talk and panel this evening. I'm just going to start off with a short karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia makinakina ki uta, kia mataratara kia tai, e he aki ana te atakura, he toi, he huka, he haihu, tihe Māori ora. So thanks for joining us this evening. My name's Emma McInnes. I have a long background in advocacy, being involved with Gen Zero, was there on the original days, not the original days, but sort of the second phase of Skypath. And I am the chair of Women in Urbanism Aotearoa. I'm also an avid bike rider and soon to be a mum on a bike. So I'm very excited about that. And I'm very excited to be here with this really awesome panel lineup that we have. So I'm just going to introduce our first speaker, who's going to be delivering the keynote. You probably already know him, Tim Adriaansen. He's a sustainable transport advocate and a cycle skills instructor and community activator. And he will be giving about a 20-minute keynote this evening, which will quickly walk us through the important relationship between transport and climate, and why we're getting across the Harbour Bridge, and why getting across the Harbour Bridge on a bicycle should be the key to meeting our emissions target. And then we'll be joined by the fabulous Tamara Bozovic and Julie Anne Genter as well, and I'll introduce them when the time comes. So I'm going to hand it over to Tim now for a presentation.
Kia ora, Emma, thank you. Tēnā koutou, everybody. Thanks for coming along. I'm going to kind of rip straight into it because there's so much content that we'd like to cover as part of this, and really each of these topics could have their own discussion. But I'm going to fly through some of the really key talking points that I think we should be having if we're going to be having a discussion on transport and climate, and then of course lead to the Harbour Bridge, which is such a hot topic that a lot of people want to learn about. So I'm going to aim to answer three key questions. Why is transport important? Why are bikes a really important part of the transport picture? And why the Harbour Bridge? First of all, why is transport important? Well, in urban environments like Auckland, transport is responsible for the bulk of our emissions. We know that nationally, agriculture is responsible for a large portion of emissions, but when we look at Auckland's regional boundaries, and we look at what we can actually impact. If we're here living in Auckland, we're not really going to do a lot about what's happening in the rest of the country, but our local electorates, our people here in Auckland, we have a chance to change what's happening locally, and that is transport. If we look at all the other sectors, agriculture, industrial, stationary energy, which is things like gas and coal for heating, etc., even if we make quite a big change to these areas, it may not make a big change overall. So if we dive a little further into the transport picture, we can see that, and these numbers on this chart, by the way, they're of the total emissions profile. So cars make up 30% of all of Auckland's emissions total. All the other sectors, heavy vehicles, ferries, public transport, aviation, only constitutes about 14%, but the light vehicle fleet accounts for twice as much as all of that combined. So really, if we want to look at how we can reduce emissions, we've got to focus on cars. This is the major talking point. We need to focus on cars. In particular, they're both the most important part of our emissions picture, but they're also kind of the low-hanging fruit. There are so many alternative options for transportation. We can find a whole lot of different solutions that work for different people. How much do we need to reduce emissions from transport? We want to aim to stay within 1.5 degrees of global warming to avoid the worst effects of climate change. And we've got a few different kind of models or frameworks that we can use to achieve this. The minimum, the starting point, is what's laid out under the emissions reduction plan, and this calls for a 20% reduction in driving by 2035. And this is 20% less across New Zealand as a whole. So, for example, in rural environments, there might never be a bus to catch. It might be completely impractical to ride a bicycle to the local shops, for example. So we can't expect rural New Zealanders to reduce their driving by quite as much as we can for urban New Zealanders. As well as this, by 2035, we're expecting to see significant increases in New Zealand's population, which means that per individual, we'll need to drive even less again. So what this really looks like is for urban New Zealanders like Aucklanders, it'll be 40 to 50% less driving each. Then we have the leadership position, what's drawn up under Te Taruki a Tāwhiri, or Auckland's Climate Plan, and the C40 commitments. C40 is a collection of cities internationally trying to show leadership to stay within 1.5 degrees of global warming. Under Te Taruki, we're looking at a 64% reduction in CO2 emissions from transport by 2030. That's a huge change in a relatively short space of time. If we think back to how much of that emissions profile was created by the light vehicle fleet, it means a greater than 50% reduction in emissions from light vehicles by 2030. So there are a lot of numbers here. Is it 64%? Is it 40 to 50%? Is it by 2030, 2035? Well, we don't really need to worry about all of that, actually. We're going to narrow it down to the simple solution to climate change, and that looks like this. We need to reduce emissions from transport as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Now, something that I'm really conscious of is that we should avoid tackling emissions in isolation. For what it costs us, our transport system doesn't serve us particularly well. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at some of the costs associated with the transport system. There's the direct financial cost, which is fairly obvious. This is the cost of owning and operating the motor vehicle, but it's also the cost of constructing and maintaining the roading network, which is very expensive. There's the land use cost. As much as 50% of public space in urban environments is taken up by use and storage of motor vehicles. Environmental costs like air and water pollution, but also waste products like car tires and other non-recyclable components, waste lubricants, etc. The healthcare costs. Road crashes are very direct and understandable, but actually the mental and physical impacts of that pollution, as well as a sedentary lifestyle-related transport system, are much greater than the road crash costs themselves. The time costs. We frequently encounter congestion in Auckland, which leads to delays, and there's not a lot of resilience in the transport system. You get one minor crash and the whole system can grind to a halt. It's highly inequitable. It primarily disadvantages low-income earners who need to spend a disproportionately high level of their income on transport. But it also doesn't work well for anybody who can't or shouldn't operate a motor vehicle due to disability, legal reasons, sickness, etc. We invest all of this into transport. We've sacrificed our environment and our health and our land and a whole lot of money. And we've actually ended up with a transport system that isn't very good. We're still finding that most Aucklanders actually, if you ask them in the before times when we weren't in lockdown, if driving in Auckland was a pleasant experience, they'd probably say no. Actually, it doesn't work very well, and we're never sure where we're getting. They think public transport isn't very good. Riding a bicycle is too dangerous. So we've given all this up to transport, and we haven't got very good results. And this is really quite ludicrous. I'm going to quickly segue into electric vehicles, which a lot of people will talk a lot about when we're talking about transport and decarbonization. And they'll say, well, it's not really a problem. We can just adopt electric vehicles in mass at scale, and then that will reduce our emissions from this whole light vehicle fleet, right? The problem with electric vehicles is we need to have some really honest conversations about what they can do and what they can't. So they're going to be an important part of the transport picture. Some people will always need to drive. We're going to have emergency services vehicles. We're going to need to have deliveries that are too large to be carried by other means within the urban environment. So they're definitely an important part. We want to electrify our buses. We want to electrify service vehicles. And they are going to be there. I'm not saying don't buy electric vehicles. But for the light vehicle fleet and for our transport habits, we need to start talking about, first of all, how much this is going to cost. In all the documents that you'll see that say we should transition to EVs, they might talk about how much it costs to provide some of the infrastructure or how much a subsidy might cost, but they'll very rarely broach the topic of how much it will cost us in total. And to meet our emissions reduction targets by what we're aiming for in 2030, we'll need to get about 2 million electric vehicles into the country. And this is a back of the envelope calculation. It's not the total figure. But if it's about $40,000 average cost, we're talking about spending $80 billion on electric vehicles by 2030. It's a ridiculous cost. We need to ask ourselves, is this really the best way that we can spend this money? So they're unlikely to be adopted quickly enough. The reality is we'll need to start importing a whole lot more vehicles than we currently do, and 100% of them will need to be electric. And it's totally unrealistic. At the moment, we're looking at 8 to 10% of vehicles imported being electric, and we don't really want to be importing even more than we are. So in terms of electric vehicles, thinking that we will reach our emissions reduction target with EVs is really, it's magical unicorn thinking. They're just not going to get there. In terms of supporting infrastructure like chargers, that's not too complex or expensive, but we do have to make a decision. Are we going to put in EV chargers, or are we going to build better footpaths? You know, there's a limited budget and limited capacity for things, and we've got to decide on our priorities. And we may need additional generating capacity. This is not my area of expertise, but if you're talking about 2 million electric vehicles on the road in the next 8 years, there are some very real concerns about how much electricity that's going to require. So when we consider transport costs and the transport picture, how do EVs stack up? If they're going to be this expensive and we're going to move towards them, how does that look actually? Well, it doesn't look very good. In terms of the direct financial cost, they're still the same. They're still expensive. They still require expensive roads. In terms of land use, they still take up a lot of space. In terms of environmental costs, yes, they don't have the soot emissions from an internal combustion engine, but they still have the emissions that occur due to mechanical wear and tear and abrasion, and they still produce waste products like tires, which are difficult to recycle. In terms of healthcare costs, you're still going to see road crashes. A lot of people think that perhaps once we move to EVs, they're going to have advanced computers and sensors, and this is going to prevent crashes. Unfortunately, I don't really subscribe to this. Anytime you have a large piece of machinery moving quickly through a public space, you have a high risk of a crash, right? It's just a reality. It's a physical reality of the device. So if we have lots of things, lots and lots of cars moving quickly through lots of public spaces, it's almost a certainty that we will continue to see crashes and accidents. Similarly, transforming our system towards electric vehicles, we don't gain any of the mental or physical health benefits that we could out of active transport. In terms of time cost, electric vehicles are going to suffer just the same congestion and unpredictable delays as any other car. It doesn't matter how much you link them up with a computer from one to the other. This is a physical reality. If you try to put lots of big things into the same space at the same time, you will get congestion, no matter how smart the software behind it is, right? And of course, they're just as inequitable, if not more inequitable. If we move towards an EV system, we'll be pushing people towards adopting a new car sooner than they otherwise might. And this is least possible for lower income earners. So EVs may reduce carbon emissions, but they don't have all the other benefits of all the other transport modes. So this is the simple solution that you want to remember. It's not newer cars, but fewer cars. The biggest opportunity that we have actually is to reduce travel through urban design. And a lot of people know this, a lot of urban designers know this, transport advocates know this, but it's not often a well understood concept. And actually the best thing we can do is start to build a city where people live close by to what they need to access. Compact urban environments with short travel distances. Remove the need to travel entirely, and if you do need to travel, it's very fast and easy walking or cycling. And we've really made some progress towards this recently with government announcements, so kudos to the government for that, building higher density living. But this is something that might take a generation. It might take 25 years to transform Auckland, and we can't really build our way out of climate change. We actually will need to change what we're doing now to get there. So active transport is objectively, and I say that with a little bit of bias, it's objectively the best performer of all the transport options. It's extremely low cost. Most importantly, it's the only option to have widespread health benefits. Walking, cycling, scooting, wheeling, these kind of things make us healthier, and we shouldn't be talking about transport without talking about health. They're particularly energy and resource efficient. Actually, the bicycle is the most efficient transport machine ever invented, and they're sufficient for almost all the trips that we make already, even without the compact environment. Nearly 90% of the trips people make in Auckland are less than 10 kilometers, which is an easy cycling distance. And as you can see, I've picked some images. Yes, you can take the kids to school. Yes, you can pick up everything at Mitre 10 Mega. It's possible to do it on a bicycle. And also, they complement the public transport network. What we really want to do is get a good, robust public transport network. And one of the best investments we can make in public transport is actually to link up good active transport to those transit nodes. So here's the thing that we want to remember. Cities need to stop making cycling possible and start making cycling preferable. This is what we want to aim for in terms of how we move forward with our transport system. Cool. So what's the simple solution to emissions from transport? Skipping over everything that we've just seen really, really quickly, what does that mean for us? What do we want to do as a city going forward? Well, I've reduced it to 2 simple steps. Here's how we can basically hit our emissions reduction targets. Step 1, reallocate existing road space to public and active transport to quickly create a network, right? It's really important that it's a network effect. It needs to carry people from where they are to where they need to be, not just small sections, but a whole network as quickly as possible. And we need to use what we've already got. Instead of trying to build routes elsewhere in spaces that are left over, use the roads that we already have and use them more wisely. And then give bikes and buses to the people, right? Not strictly buses, but all public transport. They should be affordable and accessible to everybody. Basically, we want to make sure that everybody that wants to ride a bike has a bike, and everybody that wants to catch the bus can catch the bus, regardless of their financial situation, regardless of their age, regardless of their ability. Cool. So, the gap in the map, or the Auckland Harbour Bridge, and small changes with a big impact. If we're talking about networks and we're talking about ensuring that people can get from where they are to where they need to be, it's really hard to avoid a really strategic piece of infrastructure like the Auckland Harbour Bridge. And if our aim is to get as many people as possible onto bikes as quickly as possible, or as many people out of their cars as quickly as possible, it's again hard to overlook the Auckland Harbour Bridge and the fact that you can see the cycle networks on the map here. They really link up already either side, and there's a gap in the middle. I would swear that if you could get a benefit to cost ratio of basically any transport project in this country at the moment, reallocating a lane of the Harbour Bridge to make it possible to ride a bicycle across would probably be the best performer that there is. So why not ferries, shuttles, or bikes on buses? Why aren't I advocating for these things, which would leave the drivers alone and they could have their bridge and it wouldn't be a political hot potato, so to speak? And you can see here there's an Amsterdam roll-off ferry, which are fantastic machines, and they'll take maybe 50 bikes across the harbour. They run all day for free, fast and simple and easy. And we also have a photo of what used to be the Auckland Harbour Bridge shuttle bus. I think this is from the late 70s. Why can't we just take our bikes on a bus and get across the bridge? Well, these are solutions to the wrong question. They're asking the question, how do we get people and bikes across the harbour? And that's a legitimate question to ask. That's the question that you'd think we're trying to solve, right? That's the first thing. But really what we want to solve is, how do we make cycling preferable? How do we make people want to ride a bike, right? So to answer that, we should look at the reasons that people ride a bike in the first place. And if we do that and we dive into the research, we see it keeps me fit. It helps me get fitter. It's fun to do. It saves money. All of these things, if we look at a ferry or a shuttle bus, well, are you going to get fit when you're sitting on the ferry? Unfortunately not. I do enjoy ferries. They are fun, but are they as fun as coasting down the Harbour Bridge, looking out across the Waitakere? I don't think they are, right? And saves money, well, unless they're free, in which case, there's going to be some equity issues about the ferries that aren't free. It's likely that it won't save you money either. So actually, all of these things are likely to suppress demand for cycling across the harbour. People won't get out of their cars in order to catch a ferry, but they will get out of their cars in order to ride a bike. So why not ferries, shuttles, or bikes on buses? It doesn't provide the benefits that people enjoy from using a bike. There's a risk that our transport agencies will latch onto this and they'll say, okay, we've solved that problem. Now we don't need to worry about it. Okay. And we don't want them to do that. We need to get a lot of people across the harbour really quickly. They also can't possibly carry enough people. And I'll dive into a few numbers really, really shortly, really quickly. And they add significant delay to the journey. So talking quickly about numbers, we want to see about 7% of all the trips that people make in Auckland be made by bikes and scooters by 2030. That's kind of our target. Now, you could have more people traveling by bike in one part of the city and fewer in another part of the city, but the Auckland Harbour Bridge being really central and a really great connection, this is somewhere that, if possible, we'd like to see 7% or even more of the trips going across the bridge to be made by bikes and scooters. If you take the number of people traveling across now and you take 7%, you see that there's about 14,000 bike and scooter trips a day. That's what we want to aim for to hit our climate targets. So if each ferry took 100 bikes, for example, which would be a ferry twice the size of the ones they use in Amsterdam, we'd need a ferry roughly every 2 minutes to get that many people across. It's just unfeasible. This is a solution that does not scale in order to solve our climate issues, right? It's a solution for people to get across the harbour with a bike, yes, but it's not a solution to climate change. Similarly, they increase the duration of the journey. It would actually be from Takapuna to Britomart with a bridge crossing. It would be fastest by e-bike out of all the modes available. It would be faster than the bus, and it would be faster than driving. I swear, it would be a fantastic way. But if you have to detour and catch a ferry or wait to load a bus, it's going to add as much as 50% to the journey time, and that will put people off using it. So cycling works best when it's fun. Focus on making it fun, keep people on their bikes. What about some alternative proposals? Just really quickly, I'll run through some of these because some people aren't up to speed on why they work and why they don't. This is the latest proposal that was kind of taken seriously, which is that we'd add on another bridge beside the existing one and build it onto the piers that are already in the harbour. So it's kind of a second edition similar to the clip-ons, but it's been ruled out as structurally impossible. I'm not an engineer and I can't tell you what's wrong with it exactly, but I'm going to take Waka Kotahi's word for it that this is the case. So this is a concept that comes up occasionally, the whole we can fit it within the existing space. And this is based on the idea that the clip-ons are 9 meters wide, which is really very wide for 2 lanes of traffic. A lane of traffic can be as narrow as about 2.9 meters at its absolute minimum, more like about 3 meters. So if you had 2 lanes of traffic at 3 meters, you've got 3 meters left over for either a bike path or a walking path. Well, first of all, we need a barrier in there to protect people, and that's going to take up another half a meter. So then we've got about 2.5 meters left, right? And this is going to have big fences on either side. And if you imagine traversing a very long, narrow bridge with quite an incline, there's a reasonable gradient that people will get some speed up on. It's going to feel like you're in a very narrow tunnel. And particularly, I don't think you'll see this idea pitched by women very often once they understand or imagine what it would feel like to actually be in this space. I don't think a lot of women will feel comfortable, particularly if they're walking in a space like this and somebody's walking behind to pass, or if they're biking and somebody's trying to pass. It doesn't work well for the disabled community. If you're in a wheelchair bike or a trike, or you don't quite have perfect balance, this is a space that is extremely narrow. It will be very uncomfortable. It doesn't work well for young children who don't necessarily understand the keep left concept. So as far as I'm concerned, if it's not a concept that works for everybody, if it doesn't work for the disabled community, if it doesn't work for families with children, it's not really an attractive prospect. It's simply not safe. It's likely to lead to crashes if you have 2 bikes passing each other in the space of 2.5 meters. So Skypath, hopefully we all remember Skypath. Fantastic concept, really great idea. Potentially, can't exactly say why it was ruled out, perhaps for dubious reasons. It seemed like something bigger and better wanted to be built. But I think Skypath at this point might be worthy of reinvestigation. But I'm aware that even that probably doesn't have the capacity to reach our emissions reduction goals. So Skypath could be a good interim option, or it could be an option just for pedestrians. What about the alternative bridge proposal, which this year was announced and then it was scrapped? I think an alternative bridge is actually the best option for Auckland going forward. That's my personal opinion, but it's not a walking and cycling bridge. What we need is a public transport bridge that has really good walking and cycling facilities. We should go for a light rail bridge, right? But it's unlikely that we'll build this sort of thing by 2030. And what we need to see is a tremendous shift in transport habits before 2030. So actually, while this is the best solution, I think, going forward, it's not a climate change solution. We need something pragmatic. We need something that's fast, and we need something that we can roll out as soon as possible. That looks like this. Liberate a single lane of the bridge. I promise you this is the best option we can go for. If we need to reduce driving by 20% by 2030, then we don't need all the capacity on the bridge anyway, okay? It's going to be spare capacity. The sooner we do this, the sooner we get people out of cars, the sooner we hit our emissions reduction targets. That's everything. I hope you gathered it all. Apologies for the audio, but I open it up to the panel and we can throw some questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tim. That's such a great presentation. I'm going to have to steal those slides off you, especially the ones with all the figures. I just love that. And I love what you said about, making cycling preferable. I think it was a really good message to drive home. For me, I came from a farm and I had the only way that I could get anywhere was by car. And so when I came to Auckland, I never thought that I could make cycling preferable for me. But the idea of driving in Auckland with a peppy in the back, having a baby in the back of a car is truly terrifying for me. Cycling is by far my greatest preference because like I think it's by far the safest way to go. I mean, as long as you're taking, protected cycle lanes, I guess. But the idea of driving in Auckland is just not preferable at all for me. So yeah, I love that messaging. I'd like to bring on the other panelists. So we have the excellent Tamara Bozovic, transport engineer and researcher. Recently, she's completed her PhD thesis on non-walkability in the car-centric city. She's just handed that in, she's told me. So thank you for being here, Tamara. And we also have someone who really needs no introduction, especially in this space, because she's pretty much been the bike champ of Aotearoa for a very long time now. She's Julie Anne Genter, the Greens transport spokesperson and former Associate Minister of Transport. And she's also bringing a PP into the world. So that's, we've got a few people here who are really understanding the preference of cycling, particularly with our babies in mind. So lovely to have you both here as well to join the panel. I'm just going to start with an opening question that's sort of like, because I think that there is a really big focus of this presentation around Skypath and that movement over the bridge, right? So I would just love to, for all of you to reflect on that first time you thought about getting across the bridge, and what really excited you about that project, like the prospect of being able to cycle from North Shore to the city. When was it for you? And yeah, what was it that really excited you about the project? And perhaps we'll start with Julie Anne.
Kia ora koutou, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So in 2009, I was at that original protest where we cycled across the bridge. That was before I was a member of parliament. I was working as a transportation planner. And using a bike was my main mode of getting around Auckland. I'll be honest with you, the North Shore was dead to me as a place I could not cycle, and I did not go. And, since then, a lot of time's passed, 12 years, and I was at the most recent protest where we cycled across. And last year, I think I stayed in Tekapuna, and I was really impressed that actually was a really cool, vibrant neighborhood and so close to the city center. And I think that I also have a friend who cycles everywhere who shifted to Auckland to do some training at North Shore Hospital, and they're living in the city center. And she really wants to be able to cycle to work and back, and she can't. So I don't know, what's exciting for me is just the idea of joining up bits of our city and making them accessible for people on bikes.
Yeah, what about you, Tamara? Did you have a moment with Skypath where you're like, oh yeah, that should have happened, many years ago? And what was it for you that sort of excited you about the project?
Yeah, well, I unfortunately never rode across the bridge, even though I ride pretty regularly. But what excites me is,
you might want to hold the mic up slightly more to your mouth.
Yeah. Do you hear me now? Sorry.
I think so. Give it just as close as you can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it was a bit on the side. Okay. Is it now? Is it good now?
Yeah, you're good.
Cool. Okay, so what excites me is that I think Auckland has so much inherited infrastructure, and it's infrastructure that was designed in the 50s, 60s, and built in the 60s, 70s. And I think there is such a need, as Tim said, and potential to change how we use this infrastructure that we have and all this space that we have. And what excites me about this project is that it would be an example of repurposing existing infrastructure and making it do another work, making it do something that we need now, which is just urgent climate action and action towards carbon neutral modes.
And Tim?
Yeah, I think it's been said, actually. What it really excites me about cycling advocacy is trying to make an inclusive city. We're really deficient in one particular mode, which is this wheeled mode, the safe routes for people on bikes, and we need those key links for that. But the reason the bridge is so exciting is because of what Tamara said. It's really a litmus test for whether or not we're willing to tackle climate change head on. If we are, we'll reallocate space on the bridge. That means we're taking this seriously. And if we're not, we'll try to build our way around it and fluff around the edges and talk for years to come. So I'm excited about this as let's take this seriously and let's do it.
as well as taking it seriously, like the importance of getting up into the middle of the bridge and taking a shot for your gram is, I don't think that people understand how important that is to most Aucklanders and tourists. So, you know, I think there's many reasons why we need that pass, and yeah, thank you for covering most of it already. So I just also want to quickly hear from Julie Anne about, you know, where we are at now. You know, just like, I mean, you sort of did give a brief overview of this, Tim, but like as the ex transport minister, associate transport minister, Julie Anne, yeah, what, like, where are we right now with the bridge, and what are the possibilities, do you think?
Well, I think it's quite sad, because I think the Labour government proposed a cycling and walking only bridge that was very easy to politically attack, and then they've walked back from it. And really the logical thing to do would have been to commit to public transport and active transport bridge. As Tim said, it will take a long time to deliver that, and that's why the Green Party's been advocating for reallocating a lane immediately, or at least as a trial. And I know that the minister is asking Waka Kotahi, the New Zealand Transport Agency, for options on a trial. I think we're up against a couple of different things. I mean, one is that in the public sphere, it's easy to ridicule spending on cycling because so few people are using it for transport, and it's not perceived as like a serious way of getting around. And so you can say, we're going to spend any amount on a motorway and double it and triple it, and nobody really complains. But if you propose spending a serious amount of money on cycling infrastructure, it gets lampooned quite quickly. And the other thing we're up against is Waka Kotahi, the highways guys, and they are all guys, who are in charge of the bridge, are the ones who are sort of charged with delivering the government advice on what's possible on the bridge. And they don't take cycling seriously, I don't think. And they can't imagine reallocating a lane away from traffic. And they constantly, instead of coming up with ways that we could do it, they're just giving ways that you can't. So they say you can't reallocate one lane because you need to reallocate 2 lanes, and that would be too much and the traffic would get really bad. I do think there's a proposal for opening it up on Sunday mornings, which is more of a Ciclovia approach, which isn't going to demonstrate the benefit for commuters and may not really be as successful. But on the other hand, it does enable people to ride across and see what it's like. And I think what people are often surprised about when they don't ride a bike normally, especially if you put them on an e-bike, is just how pleasant and easy it actually is. You know, your impression driving over it is that it's really far, that it's a really steep gradient, that it would be really unpleasant to be up there on a bike. But every time I've been over the bridge by bike, and it's been at least 3 times, it's been lovely and quite a bit easier than you would think.
Yeah, and especially easy on the electric bike as well. So yeah, I also, because I know that I feel like the government really listened too much to the talkback show hosts over the last few months, like especially after you know, the recent charge to get across. And I do wonder, you know, if they're just a bit biased, and because most of their clients are in cars, and so it's like if their clients are their customers are all on their bikes and they're not listening to them or something like that. But yeah, anyway, we've got to make sure that you know, our government is not listening to the talkback show hosts and getting their way, because that's what it really felt like. Do we know if we have a date for that summer trial of the Liberate the Lane? Because we've heard a bit about that. So, but that might be something you know a bit more about, Tim.
I haven't heard anything, unfortunately.
Okay, that was a question from someone from Instagram today, I believe. So yeah, so I'll just yeah, how do we make Waka Kotahi take cycling seriously? What's our game plan here?
Well, I do think it's going to require political leadership, and you know, cities all over the world have reclaimed car lanes for active transport. Vancouver, I think it took them over 10 years. It was initially proposed in the 1990s, and it wasn't until, you know, possibly 2010 or 2011 that they actually did it, but it's been very successful. And at the time that they did it, all the Chamber of Commerce types were saying, this is crazy, this is ridiculous. And years later, they come back and say, oh, actually that worked. And I mean, the same pattern is going to hold true in Auckland. This is never going to be something that you do and you get Mike Hosking or Barry Soper or any of those classic right-wing ZB magic talk people going, yes, this is a great idea. So it takes political leadership, but I think it would also be helpful if there was technical support for doing it. And I think one of the challenges for politicians is not having the engineers, give them like viable options. And I think they're probably getting conflicting advice. So, I mean, my understanding is that it is possible to do it with one lane only, but that's not what the senior leadership of NZTA are saying. And I think the government really needs to have a serious conversation with the chair and the board about, making sure that they're getting alternative opinions that they can trust and rely on.
Yeah, and just checking that Tim or Tamara, you didn't have any answers to add to that?
I asked really the similar question about walking, and I was looking at what are our barriers to improving walkability in the city. And amongst others, I engaged with professionals working in different disciplines to have their views. And it was really interesting how we identified the vicious circle. And part of this vicious circle is senior management not valuing walking enough. But I think that it's not the only thing, and we really have a systemic issue. For instance, we speak about improving accessibility and improving livability and the experience of moving in the streets, but none of these are part of our decision-making metrics. None of these count when it comes to allocating budgets. We allocate budgets based on benefits cost ratios, and those are very easy to calculate for traffic and are known to promote building more roads. And it's really all that we add in terms of experience, in terms of accessibility, in terms of removing barriers to certain populations. For instance, disabled people are basically unable to travel independently in Auckland. So those elements are just not part of the decision making. And as they are not part of the decision making, it's also not data that we gather. And so we don't also have an overview of what are those points where we should really be investing. That was my $1 million question. Where should we start? Where, if we were to make a difference, what is the one thing that we should do? And we don't know, because we don't have the data. We don't know where are those short trips that people drive, possibly because walking and cycling are just not appealing or unsafe or problematic for another reason. So we don't have this overview. We don't have an overview of the barriers. The projects, therefore, don't take this into account and don't show the decision makers the benefits on amenity or experience, because it doesn't really count. You can put it in a report as a extra add-on or benefit, but that's not what is going to cut the mustard. And so you perpetuate this circle of governance not really paying attention to making a better city and investment perpetuating the status quo.
Just got thanks for that. I've got a question from Gareth, which might be a good segue. Is there any legislation change that could force Waka Kotahi's hand? And shouldn't the climate emergency demand such a legislation change? That's for anyone to answer. Well,
I think that, yeah, I can speak to that. I don't want to talk too much, but so I think that the Zero Carbon Acts, through the requirements for carbon budgets, does present a legislative opportunity, and there have already been some judicial reviews taken against both NZTA and Auckland Transport for their different things like the Regional Land Transport Plan or the National Land Transport Plan. I think it's difficult to establish on a case-by-case basis. And so maybe there does need to be a law change to make it more explicit that every project needs to take into account carbon budgets. I think NZTA is like kind of struggling to incorporate this type of thinking into their process. It's pretty clear from the Ministry of Transport Emissions Reduction Plan draft, which by the way is out for submission, and you should all go and submit on it. I think submissions close the 24th of November. Please do go submit. And the Ministry of Transport Emissions Reduction Plan does make it really clear that you have to prioritize alternatives to new road capacity, and that includes road space reallocation in order to get the emissions reduction that is required under the Zero Carbon Act. I don't think the senior leadership of Waka Kotahi believe this. I don't know if they agree with it, and I know that up until now, the way that they have evaluated projects, the model assumptions that they take into account in the traffic modeling sort of go in the other direction and say something completely nonsensical and that we know is objectively false, which is if you build a new motorway or if you increase road capacity, it reduces emissions, and if you take away road capacity, it increases emissions. And the reason the models say that is because they don't take into account mode shift. And by mode shift, I mean people switching to using bikes or e-bikes or public transport or not making certain trips by car. And until we have, it's entirely possible to model it in a more realistic way. But I guess when you have an institution that's really wedded to what they've always done, it's quite difficult to know how we force them to do it differently. And I'm hoping the judicial review process will demonstrate that that's what's going on.
What about you, Tim? Does Bike Auckland have any position or thoughts around this?
It's it's a difficult topic to get into. Waka Kotahi is a large organization, right, with a lot of people involved. I can say we've seen advice given around the bridge that is based on exactly this modeling, traffic modeling, that suggests that if you were to reallocate space to travel by bicycle, for example, that nobody would get out of their car. What they do is they drive around out west to get to the city because that would be quicker. And it's completely unrealistic. We know from countless examples overseas that when you make it possible, or even better, when you make it preferable, when you make it convenient and fun and safe to ride a bicycle, this is actually the mode that people will choose. So you do have to ask some very serious questions about an organization that looks at advice like that or modeling like that and says, yes, we will make some very major decisions based on something that is really, it's demonstrably false quite quickly and easily. And yeah, that's quite concerning. So I would suggest some questions need to be asked from various people around that. How come we're using information like that to make these decisions? It doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Thank you. Tamara, I was wondering what your thoughts are around the language we use when we're talking about cycling and when we're talking about this cycling bridge. Should we be focusing on pedestrians more and people other modes? Is that like a real downfall of I guess the advocacy side of things, that we constantly push the bike narrative rather than actually this is just like something that all Aucklanders can use? And is that something you've come up against in your research or have any interesting thoughts about?
Yeah, I do see, and that's the reason why I did my research, because there is a lot of focus on bike riding, and which is great, and I think which is needed. But my idea was that walking is our really fundamental mode, and that everybody walks at least for part of their trip, and it's really a bit overseen, and it's probably so ubiquitous that we don't even think about it, or that we don't even think that there is a need to think about it. However, there are whole groups of population who are experiencing barriers every day, and for the rest, I think that, Tim, you spoke of making cycling desirable.
Is that cutting out for everyone, or just me?
Desirable, and
oh no, I think it's that Point Chevalier rain. I can see it. I can see it. we'll move on, and maybe we can come back to you. Ooh, so glitchy.
Yeah, hopefully she comes back.
Yeah. So I've got a question from someone here who is very keen to know if we're planning direct action again, and not that Bike Auckland ever planned any direct action, but is this something that we should be doing? Should we be planning direct action again? Because is the cyclovia idea just not going to work, and do we just need to, do it ourselves?
I think Bike Auckland would love a cyclovia idea. We'll support that wholeheartedly. Cycling the bridge is such a positive experience. It was such a fantastic day on May 30th when there was the rally. I didn't actually get to cycle the bridge myself, but a few thousand people did, and they had a really good time. And unfortunately, it led to a huge amount of negative backlash. And this is ridiculous. How can something that is so wholesome and so enjoyable and so accessible to so many people be perceived in a negative light? I don't agree with that. That's a really bad way to go. So I don't like the cyclovia idea because it doesn't actually demonstrate how well cycling could be used as a mode of transport. It doesn't work for the commuters. It doesn't help fill that niche. But I would much prefer a cyclovia to any alternative direct action. And I think we're reaching the point where even if Bike Auckland didn't arrange something, a lot of people from the community, they're just getting fed up with how long this is taking. And it's really something we need to see some action in this place. So I guess I'm having faith. I'm asking the Minister of Waka Kotahi effectively. I'm putting it in their hands to say, look, you need to do something or somebody else will. That's basically what it's looking like.
Yeah, I remember the backlash, and that was a particularly horrible sort of couple of months of reflection, about advocacy and, just like equity, I guess, in those systems. And because I came away from that ride going, oh, like I can't hear out of my right ear. And so when I'm cycling, I'm really challenged when I'm on the road, and I feel so much more safer and confident when I'm actually in a cycle lane. And so I thought it was just the best thing ever. I was like, this is so great. Like, I'm another cycle way for me to safely cycle in, basically. What are your thoughts around, I guess, that backlash and I guess our approach to equity when we're considering where we're funding? Are we doing anything really good that people, it's just like hasn't been magnified or people just aren't talking about? Like, I do know there are a few projects in South Auckland, we just aren't talking about them. But actually there does seem to be work going on. So yeah, just your high level thoughts around equity and cycling.
The high level, yes, cycling is one of the great equalizers. I mean, it's much more accessible to ride a bike than it is to drive a car, for example. And yes, there are people who can't ride a bike, and we also want to make sure we cater to them. So at a high level, cycling is the fact that we're lacking cycling infrastructure is one of the biggest equity issues in our city right now. If you care about equity and you care about the disabled community and you care about transport poverty, you must be a strong cycling advocate. The two are absolutely correlated. So we work really hard right across Auckland. The South Auckland bike burbs, Otara bike burb, Mangere bike burb, these are the largest cycling communities. Recently, a survey came out, the TRA Active Modes study that Auckland Transport conduct, and it showed that the people that most want cycling infrastructure, that most want to ride a bicycle, are South Aucklanders, female, Pacifica, and young. These are the demographics that want to ride a bike the most. Yeah. So actually, when we're advocating, people will see white people taking to the bridge thinking they're going to go to Takapuna to get a chai latte. But the people we're actually advocating for is predominantly actually the South Auckland community. It's the Pacifica community. It's young people. It's women. It's people with disabilities. These are the people that we really want to put on a pedestal. But we're the ones that have the time and the resources to advocate. So we're the ones busy doing it.
Yeah, did you have any other thoughts to add on that, Julie?
Not really. I mean, I feel the same way. I think it's unfortunate that the media kind of want a very combative narrative, and they like to tell a story that everybody already knows, and that story is, around transport right now is very tribally divided. Like, there's cyclists and they're, white men who wear lycra and cycle long distances for sport, and anyone who's a cyclist is not also a motorist or a citizen or someone who pays rates. Only people who drive cars contribute to transport infrastructure. There's just the other thing that kills me is the sort of argument that I heard from the National Party, which was, oh, what's a tradie supposed to do? Cycle across the bridge with their tools? I mean, we actually have a tradie in Wellington who goes everywhere by e-bike and can charge less because his transport costs are less. But he's an electrician. I tried to book him and I couldn't even get him to do work for me. He was so busy. But but that's not the point. It's like, it doesn't need to work for everyone for it to be a useful contribution to the network. And I guess we just have to keep saying that. And I think, what Tim is saying is right. I mean, like, the reason we're advocating for this is very much about equity and making things more equitable. But I guess it's really hard for people who are in marginalized situations already to spend their time and effort advocating for these changes. And so, yeah, I think it's all just an excuse. Honestly, I think all of these things are not real objections. They're an excuse for maintaining the status quo.
Yeah. My partner literally just left to go cycle in the rain to pick up quite a lot of tools on his bike to come back and do things in our apartment for the weekend. So it's just I'm like, oh, that just dispelled that myth right there. That's a really good example. I have another question here from Robert Powell. Is there any intent on using the ute tax to subsidize e-bikes as well as EVs?
I guess I can speak to that. And I think, well, one, don't call it a ute tax. It's like the National Party's framing, which is dumb. Double cab utes are like the most subsidized vehicles in New Zealand at the moment, and they don't pay their fair share already. But the clean car discount, unfortunately, as far as I know, will not be used to subsidize e-bikes. But I believe the minister's putting in, he's looking for solutions, and the government will be considering options for a budget bid. The question is, does it get funded?
It was worth pointing out that e-bikes were specifically mentioned in the emissions reduction plan consultation document. So this is the submission document. I saw it come up in the chat as well. Do submit and do encourage a subsidy for e-bikes, I would suggest, is a really great way to go.
And especially cargo bikes, or, ones, I feel like they are the ones that can really replace car trips. And they're more expensive, so they're harder for people to invest in.
Yeah, you just need to get extra good locks for them, but that's possible. I'll just see if we've got any other questions coming from our social media. But will you put the emissions reduction plan link onto the Bike Auckland Facebook page, just so that people can follow it up?
Probably we'll start seeing some guides for how to make a submission coming out within the next few weeks, but we'll work on that with sort of the wider whānau to make sure that we cover all the bases. People can make a good constructive submission.
Yeah, cool.
Just put it in your diary now, okay? Because everybody always waits till the end to submit. Just remember, from about the 15th to the 24th of November, you want to get your submission in.
Yeah. This is a very good month to take climate action locally, and that's just one of the ways that we can do it. Really, really cool that we're having this climate festival to encourage all of that as well. I think I'm getting some weird noises from Tamara's, poor thing. She's gone into a black hole. So just to sort of end on, because children really very rarely get talked about, I guess, in these sort of conversations, but they're sort of, we know that from surveys done by Auckland Transport and just I don't know, everywhere, that children, would overwhelmingly prefer to walk and cycle to school if they could. But unfortunately, parents don't feel confident enough to let them just do that independently. Is there any way to get them involved in I guess, the consultation process and getting schools a bit more involved? And is there any work sort of going on there with Bike Auckland? Because I imagine that they would benefit hugely from being able to go over the bridge too, another place for them to safely cycle. So yeah, that was just another question that's come through from social media.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do teach cycle skills to kids sometimes, and absolutely most of them would prefer to get to school by bike. This is a really important piece of information. We should be asking children what they want, and often we're not. And in fact, I've had some workshops with Auckland Transport where they're looking at a street upgrade that passes a school, and I'll say, how many kids did you ask? And it's zero. They asked 0 children about the upgrades to do. These are people that actually they deserve agency. They deserve to be able to make decisions in their transport lives. Generally speaking, engaging with schools, however, is difficult because they're they're usually under-resourced, let's be honest. They're time poor and they're money poor, and the last thing they need is an advocacy group coming in and being like, hey, can we leverage off you to change the street? It's just something that they really don't have the time for. So it's really another group. I think children are a group, and I can't say that I'm some white knight or savior or something, but they need us to advocate for them. Our children really need us to work hard for them. So we should be asking them what we want, and then we've got to try and push that through and see what happens. But
I just wanted to add that there is some really amazing research that is being done with children, amongst others by Melody Smith and Victoria Egley and Kirsty Wilde as well during COVID. And it was, and you're right, Emma, we don't hear a lot from them, but there are really very important insights to be heard. And also from parents during lockdown, I've heard these really quite heartbreaking testimony. So it's Kirsty Wilde was looking at what people were posting on social media, and people saying how, oh, it's amazing not to have to clutch your child's hand so hard, because otherwise they might just die in the traffic. And it's just makes you think, do you really want to choose to live in this environment where if your child escapes for 5 meters, they are in risk of death? And I think it's a legitimate question. And I really encourage you to check out the research and the quotes from children.
Yeah, that really reminded me of that very cute illustration in Tim's presentation, where it was like, that's definitely what a world for children looks like, right? And a world that works really well for children will work really well for everyone as well. So I have to get that image of that illustration. It's so cute. All right, I think we can end on that, team, unless we've got any other last minute topics that you want to cover. No, we're good. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. Great presentation from Tim, and it was just really great to have you, Julie, and Tamara here, even though Tamara, you didn't quite work out for you. Sorry about that, but yeah, it's just particularly bad weather. I think it must have something to do with it. So I'm just going to end on a karakia. And also, is this talk recorded, by the way, so people can watch it back?
I believe it's been recorded, and we'll aim to host it on the Bike Auckland website, hopefully before the weekend. So
fabulous! So people can watch it back and send the link to others to also look at as well. But and just thank you to Bike Auckland, and thank you to the Climate Festival as well.
And also to Rob, sorry, just interrupting, to Rob from Tax Management New Zealand. He technically put the whole event together. So huge shout out to Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Right, and of course, Mary Margaret, who's been doing background work and helping me out as well with funneling those questions through. Thanks so much.
There's a whole team behind the scenes. So thanks.
That Bike Auckland team is rather excellent too. And I hear that you guys are going to get a new chair as well. So people should look into that if they're interested.
2 positions open. If anybody's interested, we're looking for a new chair and a chief biking officer, which is a paid part-time position. If anybody wants to give up their life for cycling advocacy, welcome aboard.
It's worth it, I think. Yeah. Kia whakaria te tapu, kia watia ai te ara, kia turuki whakatahia ai, kia turuki whakatahia ai, homae huie taihia. That means restrictions are moved aside so the pathway is clear to return to everyday activities. And I'm sorry about my poor dialect there, but yeah, thank you very much. It's been a really great little conversation, and have a good evening. Have a good dinner.
Kia ora. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Yeah, mate wā.